because I appreciate my colleagues taking time out, I'd like to first yield to my colleague from the state of Illinois, no disrespect to my colleague from the state of Georgia, to go into a discussion about one of the areas that we addressed. One of the first sites we talked about. I figured I better come forward and talk about my own state. If I'm going to talk about other states, I better talk about the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois is 50% of our electricity is generated by nuclear power. We're one of the biggest nuclear power states in the country. We picked a facility that's actually closed, which is the Zion power plant. And with that, I yield to my colleague, Mr. Dold, to kind of talk about Zion, the state of Illinois, and its location.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman for yielding and certainly for taking this issue up, which I think is so very, very critical, not only for just the state of Illinois, but for facilities all across the country, as we look at how we can best store the used material from the nuclear facilities. So the spent fuel rods, more specifically. If you'll notice here in Zion, which is just north of the district, but certainly affects the district just north of Chicago in the 10th district where I represent, it's right on the shores of Lake Michigan. The Great Lakes, 95% of all fresh surface water in the United States are from the Great Lakes. And when we look at the amount of drinking water that the state of Illinois uses, it's an enormous percentage that are coming from the Great Lakes. And yet in our infinite wisdom, we've decided that we want to store the fuel rods just a sheer several hundred feet from the shores of Lake Michigan, 5 feet above the water table. And if we take a look at Yucca Mountain, the reason why Yucca Mountain was chosen was Yucca Mountain is uniquely suited as the premier place. If we were to store any place spent fuel rods, this would be the ideal location. 1,000 feet below the ground, 1,000 feet above the water table. A very dry, arid environment. And correct me if I'm wrong, where's the nearest inhabitants of Yucca Mountain? Is it 100 miles?
Well, the city of Las Vegas, which is the major metropolitan area, is 100 miles from Yucca Mountain. What people have a hard time understanding about the nuclear test area, this is where the nuclear test site was. Federal government owns numerous parcels of land around Yucca Mountain. The communities right outside the reservation, and I think the whole test site area is like the size of New Hampshire to the like. But the communities, what's interesting about this debate, the communities right outside the gate are fully supportive of Yucca Mountain being the repository for high-level nuclear waste in the state of. And why do I know that? Because I visited them. I've been in their communities. I went to the community center. They welcomed me, and we talked about how this was important for the country and their local communities.
This is absolutely critical for the country. And we look at just the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois has got 13 commercial reactors at 7 sites across the state of Illinois. Our neighbors to the north have 3 commercial reactors operating on 2 different sites, both of those on Lake Michigan. And so when we look at the 8.5 million people that rely on the drinking water, much less the recreation, the fishing, all of the different forms of commerce that happen on our Great Lakes, this is something that I think is critical. The senators from both the state of Illinois and the state of Wisconsin have all been in favor of trying to utilize this facility out at Yucca Mountain, and it just makes sense. Why do we want to store, Mr. Speaker? Why would we want to store over 1,000 metric tons of nuclear waste hundreds of feet away from the greatest source of fresh surface water in our nation? It is indeed the jewel of our ecosystem. This is something that we need to protect, something that we need to have a long-term vision for. And yet what we don't need to do is have scattered sites all across our country of nuclear waste that has a greater potential for disasters to happen. They're being stored right now in casks that are about 5 feet above the groundwater, above the water table, and what we'd like to do is take it 1,000 feet above the water table, 1,000 feet below ground. This is something that absolutely makes perfect sense, and I welcome the gentleman's colloquy in terms of talking about not only this site, and I thank you for bringing it up on week after week, trying to make sure that we try to get through to our colleagues on the other side of the building to make sure they can move this common sense piece of legislation forward. How much have we spent already at Yucca Mountain? I think it's in the $14 billion range.
My colleague's correct. We've already spent about $14.5 billion in the research, the development, the exploration, the testing, a lot of money, time, effort, and some of our greatest minds have been involved. But you know, I don't really think you have to be one of the greatest minds. I mean, the point I always say is, common sense says, in the desert, underneath a mountain. Isn't that where you would want high-level nuclear waste versus right off the shore of Lake Michigan?
It seems certainly like common sense to me, and I certainly applaud the gentleman's efforts. And thank you for giving me the time. And I just want to make sure that not only this isn't just important for the folks in the state of Illinois and the folks in Wisconsin and the people in Michigan that are surrounding the Great Lakes, and specifically Lake Michigan. It's all the Great Lakes, and it's not just in Illinois. There are nuclear power facilities all across the country. We need to have a safe, secure way to be able to store these spent fuel rods, and I think Yucca Mountain has been proven to be the place to do it, and I think we should move forward on it.
Before the gentleman yields, can you tell me the disposition of Zion power plant? What's going on there right now?
The Zion power plant has actually been decommissioned at this point in time. So right now they are putting it in mothballs. They are taking the spent fuel rods. They're in casks. They are being transported into a location that's on the site. It's just literally a few hundred feet away from the beaches there, and probably about 20 to 30 miles north of the city of Chicago. This is not the place that we want to be storing spent fuel rods, and so Zion, was a great source of electricity for the people around the area, and has been decommissioned over the last 2 years. So it is now sitting idle, and they're trying to go through the process of dismantling it.
Yeah, and I think I briefly tried to show this article from the Salt Lake Tribune dated December 8th, which talks about some of the reactor parts who are going to go out to Utah. But it's what the article ends up saying is, the site will not, however, take the Illinois plant's used fuel rods. The United States currently has no site to dispose of spent fuel from commercial reactors, a form of high-level nuclear waste. So if we don't have a location, where is that high-level nuclear waste, the spent fuel, going to remain?
It's going to remain, seriously, right in the middle of a high population area, hundreds of feet away from the jewel of our ecosystem in the Great Lakes and Lake Michigan. It's the wrong place for it to be. Common sense would say, let's move it out to a location just like Yucca Mountain. $14 billion of research and dollars have gone into the site. Let's put it 1,000 feet below the ground, 1,000 feet above the water table, in an arid environment. It's absolutely perfect for it. It's something that we should move forward on. It's in the best interest and the safety of the American public to do something along these lines.
And I'm told that Zion is, what, 40 miles from downtown Chicago?
40 miles from downtown Chicago, which obviously, so we're talking in the greater Chicago area, you probably have about 6.5 to 7 million people. Certainly not what we want to have in terms of these nuclear.
And the reason why this is important, unfortunately, is because of Fukushima Daiichi in Japan, which is a great tragedy. A lot of people think about the containment issue, which has always been the fear. Part of the Fukushima Daiichi problem was the spent fuel in the pools, which might be a bigger environmental disaster based upon things that cannot be planned. That's why we continue to push this. I appreciate my colleague coming down.
And I thank the gentleman for allowing me to have some time with you today, and again for talking about this very important issue.